Kneel down. A woman who cannot bear children does not deserve to stand in the place of a wife.
Margaret's voice rang out across the small church courtyard like a slap thrown straight into the face of the woman standing before hundreds of watching eyes. And before Amara could even react, Margaret pointed down at the damp ground left behind by the rain, where the white scarf on Amara's shoulder had just been pulled and dropped.
Kneel down and apologize to my son. Apologize for keeping him trapped in a childless marriage for 3 years.
For a few seconds, the entire churchyard fell completely silent. Then the whispers began to spread like fire catching dry grass. An elderly woman seated in the front row leaned toward the person beside her and murmured,
"Poor Daniel, such a good man, only to end up with a wife who couldn't give him children."
Another woman sighed.
"It's been 3 years already. What family could endure that?"
Amara stood frozen in her old cream-colored dress, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails pressed into her palms, her eyes red but dry, because some humiliations become even heavier when you cry. People only take your tears as proof that you are guilty. That day, Daniel's family had called everyone together to pray for a blessing. But Amara understood clearly. No one placed long rows of chairs in the middle of a church courtyard. No one invited relatives from both sides, and no one allowed Grace to stand beside her mother-in-law in a bright yellow dress simply for a prayer. This was a trial, and she was the evidence being presented as the shame of the entire Okafor family. Mrs. Margaret stepped closer, pressing the Bible tightly against her chest, speaking the words of God while her eyes remained as cold as someone who had already prepared the sentence. "I do not wish to shame anyone," she said, lowering her voice until it sounded softer, though every word still cut into the ears of those listening.
"But a mother must speak the truth. If a tree bears no fruit, why would anyone keep it in the yard? What is the purpose of a wife who cannot give her husband a child?"
Amara looked over at Daniel. He stood beside his mother, wearing the dark blue suit she herself had ironed that morning, and the shoes she had personally cleaned before he left the house. But now, he would not look at her. He stared down at the cement floor, as though the answer to his cowardice was hidden there. Amara spoke very softly, almost only for him to hear. "Daniel, are you going to let your mother speak to me like this?" Daniel swallowed hard. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but Mrs. Margaret immediately turned toward him.
"You do not need to apologize for the truth. You must understand, Daniel, that our faith and our heritage are one. We cannot separate them without losing who we are."
Daniel closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them again, his voice was so weak that it hurt Amara more than anything his mother had said.
"Amara, let's try to get through today peacefully."
Those words made her whole body go still, not because they were loud, not because they were cruel in the way people scream and later regret it, but because they were calm. They sounded as if he had chosen their side a long time ago, and today was only the first time he had allowed her to hear it out loud. Grace lowered her head, pretending to be uncomfortable, but a faint smile flashed across the corner of her mouth. Mrs. Margaret reached out, pulled Grace one step forward, and raised her voice. "This is Grace. A girl who respects her elders, knows how to care for a family, and most importantly, she is still young. Daniel deserves a chance to become a father." One male relative nodded in agreement. "Margaret is right. A family bloodline cannot die because of one woman." Another voice came from the back. "If she truly loves her husband, she should step down on her own." Amara heard everything. Every sentence landed on her like small stones, not enough to make her fall at once, but enough to make her understand that in their eyes, her 3 years of sacrifice were worth less than another woman's promise to bear a child. She remembered the mornings when she woke before dawn to cook porridge for Mrs. Margaret whenever the old woman's stomach pains returned. She remembered the months when Daniel's business failed, and she quietly took in sewing work, sold food, and gathered every coin to pay for electricity, medicine, and debt. But whenever the family asked, she still said it was money Daniel had given her, because she did not want her husband to lose face. And now, the very man whose dignity she had protected was allowing the whole village to tear hers apart. Mrs. Margaret looked at Amara, her voice suddenly becoming sharper.
What are you still standing there for? Do you want my son to grow old waiting because of you? Do you want this family line to end because of your selfishness?
Amara slowly bent down and picked up the white scarf stained with dirt. Everyone in the courtyard thought she was about to kneel. Mrs. Margaret thought so too, because a brief look of satisfaction flashed across her face. But Amara did not kneel. She gently brushed the dirt from the scarf, placed it over her arm, then lifted her head and looked straight at Daniel. Her voice had grown hoarse, but it was so clear that the whispers slowly died down.
Do you want me to kneel, Daniel?
Daniel froze. Amara took one more step forward, her eyes still fixed on her husband. If you want me to kneel, say it yourself. Stop hiding behind your mother. The church courtyard fell silent. Daniel's face turned pale. Mrs. Margaret shouted,
Are you being disrespectful to your husband in front of everyone?
Amara turned to her very slowly, very calmly, so calm that it frightened people more than tears ever could.
No, Mother. I am only asking to hear the truth from the man who allowed me to carry his guilt for 3 years.
Mrs. Margaret went still for a heartbeat. Grace's head snapped up. Daniel stepped half a step back, as though those words had struck the very place where he had hidden his secret. A few people in the crowd began looking at one another, no longer sure whether they were witnessing an abandoned wife or the first crack of a much larger secret breaking open before them. Amara tightened her grip on the scarf, her eyes shining now but no longer weak.
Mother, you may call me a barren tree. The people of this village may call me a useless woman. But today, before God, before everyone, I will not kneel before a lie.
And just as those words fell across the church courtyard, the iron gate at the far end gave a dry, harsh creak. A woman in an old white medical coat stepped inside, her hair streaked with gray, a faded hospital envelope held in her hand. She looked over the crowd, then stared directly at Daniel. Daniel Okafor, she said, her voice not loud, but strong enough to drain the color from his face.
I think it is time for your family to stop blaming your wife.
In the early years, Amara had once believed that if she was gentle enough, hardworking enough, and respectful enough, the Okafor household would one day truly see her as a daughter. On the day she got married, Mrs. Margaret had held her hand in front of the neighbors and said sweetly,
From today, Amara is my daughter.
Anyone who loves Daniel must love this girl too.
Those words had warmed Amara's heart so deeply that she carried them like a promise. She woke before sunrise, swept the yard, lit the stove, cooked porridge for her mother-in-law, ironed Daniel's shirts, cleaned the shoes he wore to work, and stood at the doorway watching her husband leave with the eyes of a wife who still believed marriage was a place where two people protected each other. Daniel was gentle then. Once, when he saw her bending over to wash towels in the yard, he said,
Don't work so hard, Amara.
I married a wife, not a housemaid. She only smiled and answered, I don't feel tired. I'm taking care of our home. Back then, the words our home sounded so warm. But later, those same words would become what hurt her the most. Because some women spend their whole youth building a home, only to realize they were never truly given the key. For the first 3 months, Mrs. Margaret was still kind. She asked Amara whether she felt tired, whether she craved sour foods, whether she had been unusually sleepy. Amara blushed every time she heard those questions, because she too hoped a child would come, not to prove that she was worthy, but because she truly wanted a family. But by the 6th month, the questions began to change their tone. Are the two of you planning to delay children, Mrs.? Margaret asked in front of relatives, then looked down at Amara's stomach longer than necessary. One of Daniel's aunts gave a light laugh and said, Women these days are difficult to understand.
Women these days are very difficult to understand. They get married, but still want to live as if they're single.
Amara stood there, holding the tray of water, her throat tightening, yet she still lowered her head and said, No, we are not delaying anything, Mrs. Margaret only sighed.
Then you need to pray harder. This family cannot wait forever.
From that day on, Amara began living as though her body no longer belonged to her. Every morning, the way her mother-in-law looked at her felt like someone inspecting a tree to see whether it had finally borne fruit. With every passing month that brought no good news, Amara became a little smaller inside the very house she had once tried so hard to build. Daniel saw her sadness. He saw her become quieter, saw that she no longer hummed softly while cooking, saw her standing for a long time in front of the mirror after his mother's cruel remarks. But when she asked,
There is something I need to ask you about your mother.
he only held her half-heartedly and said, "Don't think too much."
Don't think too much. Mother just wants grandchildren.
But in truth, it was telling her to understand everyone else, while no one was ever asked to understand her. By the end of the first year, the kindness in her husband's house began to fall away piece by piece. Mrs. Margaret compared her to Samuel's wife, who had married later but was already pregnant. She compared her to the fish seller's daughter at the market, who had just given birth to a boy. She compared her to any woman whose belly could grow. "A blessed woman is one who brings honor to her husband's family," she said one afternoon while Amara was hanging clothes to dry.
A blessed woman is a woman who makes her husband's family proud. Some women enter a home and bring the laughter of children.
Amara bent down to pick up the shirt that had slipped from her hand and said nothing. She wanted to ask whether hot meals, sleepless nights caring for a feverish mother-in-law, and months of quietly saving money to help Daniel pay his debts counted as blessings too. But she did not ask because women like Amara are often taught that keeping peace matters more than keeping their dignity. Then, one rainy afternoon, Daniel quietly drove to a private clinic in the next town. He did not tell Amara because in his mind, a man going for a fertility test was already a humiliation. 3 days later, the doctor placed a report in front of him and said in a very calm voice, "Mr. Okafor, the results show that the fertility issue is on your side. Your wife should not continue to be treated as the cause when there has not been evidence from both sides." Daniel looked at his name on the paper, looked at the cold numbers printed underneath, and felt as if every piece of manhood and pride inside him had been dragged down to the ground. He asked dryly, "Could there be a mistake?" The doctor answered,
You can test again. But the most important thing is that you must tell your wife the truth.
She should not carry this burden alone.
Those words should have saved Amara. Daniel should have taken the truth home, stood before his mother, and said they had been wrong. But on the drive back, he did not think about the nights his wife had cried in silence. He thought about his mother's eyes, the laughter of relatives, and the whispers of men in the village if they ever found out that the problem was his. And in the moment when he had to choose between his wife's truth and his own pride, Daniel chose to let Amara keep suffering in his place. He hid the hospital envelope in a drawer, locked it away, and stepped back out as if nothing had ever happened. That evening, when Mrs. Margaret placed another bottle of herbal medicine in front of Amara and said,
Starting tomorrow, drink this.
Amara looked at Daniel. Just one look, as if begging him to save her from something he knew was unfair. Daniel saw that look. He knew she was innocent. He knew the report was lying inside the drawer. But he only picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, and said, "Just do as Mother says for a while."
Just follow my mother's advice for a while. What harm could it do?
That sentence took more from Amara than Daniel ever understood. The feeling of being protected, her faith in her husband, and the last bit of peace inside the house she once called her own. From the day Daniel hid the hospital envelope inside the drawer, his silence was no longer weakness. It became a very cold kind of betrayal. Amar still woke before sunrise, still cooked porridge for Mrs. Margaret still ironed her husband's clothes, still kept the house spotless, as though if she worked hard enough, they would stop calling her a useless woman. But in that house, no one saw what she did anymore. They only looked at the belly that had never grown and used it to erase every sacrifice she had made as a wife. Mrs. Margaret began placing bitter bottles of herbal medicine, strange powders, long prayer sessions, and humiliating advice from relatives in front of her. "Drink it," she said, pushing the cup toward Amara.
If you truly care about your marriage, you won't be afraid of a bitter taste.
Amara looked at Daniel. Just one look, but it held everything. "Save me, speak for me. You know I have done nothing wrong." Daniel saw that look. He knew his wife's results were normal. He knew the truth was locked away in the drawer. But he only lowered his head, avoided her eyes, and said quietly,
Just listen to my mother for a while. Don't make things bigger than they already are.
That sentence made Amara understand that the husband who once promised to protect her now only wanted her silent so he could protect his own pride. From then on, Mrs. Margaret became even harsher. If Daniel's business did not go well, she said the house lacked blessing. If Margaret was ill, she said someone had brought bad luck into the family. If the neighbors asked why there was still no grandchild, she would sigh like a suffering mother and glance toward Amara. Once, in front of two of Daniel's aunts, she said plainly, "A woman who cannot bear children, no matter how well she cooks or how clean she keeps the house, is only holding the place for someone else." Amara stood in the kitchen, still holding the ladle, her heart tightening as if someone had reached inside and squeezed it. She wanted to say that she was the one who had stayed awake all night, caring for Margaret when she had a fever. She was the one who had sold pastries at the market to help Daniel pay his debts. She was the one who had lied to the neighbors and said her husband was doing well, just to protect his dignity. But she said nothing, because some women are hurt for so long that they learn to swallow even the truth just to keep the house from exploding. Then Grace appeared. Mrs. Margaret introduced her gently.
She's just the daughter of an old friend. She's only stopping by to help with a few things.
But Grace did not act like someone who was merely stopping by. She knew how to sit beside Mrs. Margaret whenever guests came. She knew how to pour water for Daniel before Amara could even stand. She knew how to say things that pleased the whole family like,
A home truly feels complete when there are children filling it with life.
"Mrs." Margaret smiled brightly.
You see? A young woman who understands family responsibilities carries herself very differently.
No one said Grace was going to replace Amara, but slowly, every chair in that house seemed to be pulled closer to her, while Amara was pushed farther back into the kitchen, into the backyard, into the dark corners where people only remembered her when they needed hot food and clean clothes. The most painful part was that even while they looked down on her, she was still the one holding the house together. When Daniel was short on maki, she quietly gave him the money she had earned from sewing at night and told him, "Just tell your mother it came from you." When Mrs. Margaret was tired, Amara still rubbed oil on her body, still cooked porridge for her, still called her mother. She protected the dignity of the very people who were trampling on her own. Only Mrs. Evelyn, the elderly neighbor across the fence, began to sense that something was wrong. She had once met Amara at the hospital. She had heard the doctors say that Amara's results were normal. And she had also seen Daniel walking out of the private clinic one rainy afternoon, pale-faced, his hand gripping a hospital envelope tightly. One day when she saw Amara sitting behind the house, mending her mother-in-law's clothes with swollen eyes, Mrs. Evelyn asked softly, "Daughter, has your husband ever shown you his test results?" Amara looked up and remained silent for a very long time. The question was not loud, but it opened a crack in the entire lie she had been forced to carry. And before she could even find an answer, Mrs. Margaret had already prepared the prayer ceremony at the church. She invited the relatives, called Grace to come in a bright yellow dress, and placed Amara in the most humiliating position of all, standing there while another woman was presented as the new choice for her husband. Daniel still stood there, silent. And Amara finally understood that some people do not need to push you out of the house with their own hands. They only need to stand still while the whole family opens the door for someone else to take your place. The iron gate at the far end of the church courtyard opened just as Mrs. Margaret placed her hand on Grace's shoulder, as though the entire ceremony had been arranged only for Amara to watch her place being handed over to another woman. The dry creak of the hinge made everyone turn around. A woman in an old white medical coat stepped in, her hair streaked with gray, a faded hospital envelope in her hand. She did not hurry. She did not raise her voice. But her calmness made the whole courtyard feel as if something buried for far too long had finally found its way back to the surface. Daniel saw the envelope first. His face turned deathly pale. Grace took half a step back, Mrs. Margaret frowned, pulled the Bible tight against her chest, and asked,
Who are you? This is our family's matter.
The woman stopped in the middle of the aisle. She looked at Amara first, then at Daniel. "Because it is a family matter, I have stayed silent for too long," she said, her voice low and clear. "But today I cannot allow an innocent woman to be replaced on the foundation of a lie." The entire courtyard went silent at once. The people who had just been whispering about Amara suddenly sat up straighter. Daniel stepped forward, trying to keep his voice normal, but his throat had already gone dry. "You should leave." The woman looked at him, not with anger, only disappointment. "Daniel Okafor, you had years to tell the truth. You did not. So today, the truth will speak for itself." She opened the envelope and pulled out a copy of the medical report, the edge of the paper trembling slightly in the wind. Mrs. Margaret let out a contemptuous laugh.
What can an old piece of paper prove? My son has nothing to be ashamed of.
The woman turned to her, each word slow, as if placing stones onto the ground. "This paper proves that the problem was never with Amara, it was with Daniel. And he has known that for a long time." It was as if all sound had been sucked out of the air. There were no chair scraping, no whispers, no cheap looks of pity. There was only Daniel standing there, head lowered, unable to deny it, Mrs. Margaret spun toward her son, her voice breaking for the first time that day. "Daniel, tell me she is lying." Daniel's lips moved, but no words came out. And it was that silence that made everything collapse. It was no longer the silence of a man trying to avoid conflict. It was the delayed confession of a man who had allowed his wife to carry the blame for his pride. The people who had laughed at Amara began lowering their heads. The woman who had said Amara should step down on her own no longer dared to look at her. Grace stood beside Mrs. Margaret, her yellow dress suddenly looking out of place, like a role pulled off the stage too soon. Amara looked at the report, then at Daniel. She did not rush forward. She did not snatch the paper. She did not scream or cry. Her calmness made the whole courtyard struggle to breathe more than any scream could have done. She walked toward him, each step slow, like a woman who had traveled through 3 years of humiliation just to stand before the final answer. Daniel looked up, his eyes red. "Amara, I was afraid." She raised her hand to stop him. "Don't. Just one word, but it was enough to cut off every excuse." She looked at the man who had once allowed his mother to call her a tree that bore no fruit, who had allowed his relatives to turn her into a joke, who had let her drink bitter medicine, kneel in prayer, and doubt her own body, while he had known all along that the truth was in his hands. Her voice was quiet, not trembling, but so painful that the entire courtyard had to hear it.
You let me be humiliated all those years. Just to protect your own pride?
Daniel lowered his head. Mrs. Margaret took a step back, and the Bible in her hands could no longer cover anything. And for the first time, Amara was no longer the woman being judged. She was the woman standing in the middle of the church courtyard with the truth beside her, while everyone who had once used her pain to protect their own honor had to lower their faces before their own shame. After the medical report was read aloud in the church courtyard, Amara did not cry in front of them. She did not turn to Grace to fight for her place. She did not grab Daniel's hand and ask why he could be so cruel. Some pains, once they have gone too deep, no longer come out as tears. They simply sit inside the chest like a cold stone. That afternoon, she returned to the Okafor house, the house she had once called home, where every curtain, every corner of the kitchen, and every one of Daniel's shirts carried the trace of her hands. Mrs. Margaret sat in the living room, silent for the first time in years. Daniel stood behind her, his voice breaking.
Amara, please listen to my explanation.
But Amara only walked past him, entered the room, took out a small bag, and packed a few dresses, an old savings book, and the white scarf that had once been pulled from her shoulder and dropped onto the church courtyard floor. Daniel followed her. "I was afraid, Amara."
I'm scared, Amara. Afraid people would laugh at me.
She paused for a moment, then turned to look at him. There was no anger, no shouting. Only the exhausted gaze of a woman who had finally understood that she had been living with a man who loved his own pride more than his wife's peace.
I am leaving because you knew I was innocent.
She said softly.
I am not leaving because you have a health problem. But you still let your whole family throw stones at me every day.
Daniel fell silent. Because this time his silence had nowhere left to hide. Amara walked out of that house just as darkness began to fall, carrying no curses, no shouting, and no battle for people to keep gossiping about. She simply left so quietly that Mrs. Margaret watched her go without understanding why that silence made her feel more defeated than any scream ever could. The first months after that were not easy. Amara stayed with Mrs. Evelyn worked in a small tailoring shop and sold breakfast food outside the hospital gate. There were nights when she was so exhausted that she sat down on the floor and wondered how a woman could give so much and still be called useless. But every morning she still woke up. She learned how to sign her own name on documents, how to keep money for herself, and how not to flinch every time someone mentioned children. Years passed, and the woman who had once stood alone in the church courtyard was no longer the Amara who used to lower her head. She opened a small center for women wounded in marriage, a place where they could sleep safely for one night, eat a hot meal, and hear the sentence she herself had needed most.
You are not at fault because someone else treated you badly.
People in the town began to speak of her with respect. Not because she had taken revenge on anyone, but because she had lived so well that the words once used to bury her could no longer touch her. As for the Okafor house, it slowly began to fall apart. Daniel's business failed. Old debts returned like shadows. Grace left when she realized that the promise of a comfortable life was only the shell of a weak man. Mrs. Margaret fell ill and no longer had the strength to stand in the middle of a church courtyard and judge anyone. Then one rainy afternoon, Daniel brought his mother to the front door of Amara's center. The man who had once let her stand alone now stood before her with tired eyes. Mrs. Margaret sat in a chair, much thinner than before, her headscarf no longer standing as proudly as it once had. Daniel said,
Amara, my mother needs money for treatment. I know I have no right to ask you, but please help her this once.
I was wrong.
I was wrong. You were the best daughter-in-law this family ever had.
Amara looked at them for a long time. There was no hatred in her eyes, only the peace they no longer had the right to enter. She remembered the bottles of bitter medicine, the humiliating prayer sessions, the eyes that had looked at her as if she carried bad luck, and most of all, the husband who had known the truth but let her carry the blame in his place. Then she said very gently,
When I needed a family, you gave me shame. Today, I am no longer a place for you to return to.
Daniel lowered his head. Mrs. Margaret began to cry, but Amara did not open the door any wider. She simply closed it, not hard, not loudly, the way a woman finally closes the room that once made it impossible for her to breathe. Some women do not leave because they are weak. They leave because they are too tired of proving their innocence to people who only wanted them to carry the blame. And sometimes, karma does not arrive like thunder. It comes quietly on the day the woman once looked down on no longer needs an apology, no longer needs anyone to kneel, and only needs enough peace to turn away without hurting anymore. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Amara was right or wrong for what she did? And what story would you like to hear next? A mother-in-law story, a best friend's betrayal, or a wife who was underestimated and came back stronger than ever?